All right, welcome to the all-powerful Junior Developer Advocate. Why companies shouldn't just hire seniors. So before actually getting started, I want to just first explain what does a developer advocate do. This is just in case someone who's not familiar with the role, they maybe they're curious. And to me, a developer advocate is kind of like the bridge between a company and developers, where the company is building a tool that will be used by the developers. So developers are kind of like the customer. Now, the reason that this role is so important is that because first, the role of developer advocate is that you promote the tool and you let developers know about it. So there's a little bit of marketing involved. This can take kind of like different shapes. So, for example, you can do events like this one. You can do public contributions. So maybe creating open source projects, also doing live streams or creating like videos, and maybe also doing like ads. So there's just many ways where you can just market for developers. It's not like it's an art, but yeah. So this is kind of like the first point of the role, and you can also kind of collaborate with other companies. That so like in a way you build relationships. And the second thing is help developers be successful with the tool. So this is kind of like the two things that a developer advocate does. So for helping developers be successful with the tool, what does this mean? So for example, making sure that the onboarding experience is great. So whenever a user is trying out the tool for the first time, they have a great experience. They understand kind of like its value proposition. And yeah, and like if they run into any issue, they make sure to document the solution. So in case someone else runs into the same issue, they'll be able to find a solution. And one other way, and it's to build a community. So like when you have a community around your tool, you basically have people contributing to the success of your tool, and they help you promote it. So for example, I work at Prisma, and we have a fantastic developer community. Like it's one of those things that just, I don't know, like I really enjoy about Prisma. So for example, we have community members contributing by creating content, by sharing the things that they learn. So it is kind of like one aspect of developer advocacy is to make sure that there is a welcoming community where people who are contributing are recognized. So maybe we will like reshare their content, and yeah. So like I would say these two points are a bit of an oversimplification because in reality there's just a lot more going on. And this is like a really cool diagram from a blog post called The Subtle Art of Being a Developer Advocate by Wasim. And yeah, so like what people see is like the public contributions, the traveling, the public events, the speaking, kind of like being active on Twitter. But in reality, there's actually a lot more involved. So, for example, like building strategies and tactics. So, how do you want to promote like the product, for example? And like how do you develop like a content strategy? So you kind of like just cover so that you have content that that can be read by different developers, where each developer has kind of like a different level of experience. You can also be customer zero. So this is something that I experience like almost every 2 weeks. We have a new release, so we test it, and in case there are any bugs, any issues, we always like report it to like engineering. And kind of like you also improve like the documentation, like maybe create like content that helps developers just have a better experience with the tool. So like there's so much more. So it's not just kind of like the fun stuff. Like this is the fun stuff, the events, talking and speaking and traveling. But yeah, so like there's actually a lot more involved. Now, how do software engineers actually break into DevRel traditionally? So the traditional path is that you first become a software engineer. You spend a couple of years. You're first a junior, you're then like a mid-level engineer, and then you're a senior. And then you kind of have just a lot of different options, really. So maybe you want to transition into engineering management, or you want to transition to project management, product management. Maybe you're interested more into like the business side of things, or the marketing side of things, kind of like DevRel, or maybe like hiring. There's just so many possibilities. And the traditional path has always been like, oh, you're an engineer, you've built software, you spent kind of like, you have hands-on experience and you contributed, you were part of a team and you work with different tools. And then what happens is you kind of like, hey, I want to do DevRel. I want to focus more on education and kind of like meeting new people and interacting with the community. And this path is really fine. However, like the reason that companies hire seniors for DevRel roles, and this is like the primary reason, they can engage in highly technical conversations. So because the developer advocate sits between the developer and the company, they have to be able to engage in technical conversations. That's why it's not just enough to be a marketer, you also have to be a technical person. So kind of like, okay, understanding the trade-offs between your tool and other alternatives, or is the tool the right fit for, the customer or the user's use case. So this is kind of like primarily the first reason. But like, however, I'm going to just reveal why there's a little bit of a challenge for developers who are senior and transitioning into DevRel. But before that, I want to actually share how I got into DevRel. So my path is not the traditional path. And so the way I got into it, I've had a couple of years of experience as a front engineer. I've been doing it for 3, 4 years, something like that. So I'm all about like accessibility, designing responsive layouts, building great user experiences. And after a while, I was like, okay, I want to be known in the community and I want to give back to the community. So this way, people know who I am and the value that I can bring. So this way, it's easier for me to kind of like find jobs. And I didn't even know that DevRel was a role. And what happened, I was like, okay, let's create content. So I already kind of like had the hobby of creating videos. And then I just started sharing what I learned, started writing a little bit, started speaking at conferences. And yeah, and like this is kind of like what I do right now. So I currently work as a developer advocate at Prisma. I also became an instructor at Egghead, and like at the moment, I'm also like part of AWS's community builder program. And these are all of my links. So this is kind of like how I got into it. So I'm not a super senior person. Like I have gaps in my knowledge. I've built projects, but I haven't led like a team. I didn't like mentor junior developers. So I had like hands-on experience, but there's still gaps in my knowledge. And what happened was Prisma was looking for a developer advocate, and they just wanted someone who's good at content, and this is something that I was good at. So that's why I joined. And yeah, and it's like I've been there for almost a year, and yeah, it's just so rewarding, and I'm super happy. But yeah, so like I want to compare kind of like the two different paths and kind of like weigh in the pros and cons. And what I want to say is that if you're building a developer relations team, you should have both. It's not like, oh, I should pick the junior or I pick the senior. No, you should actually have both because they complement each other. So the senior engineer, they can engage in technical conversations. They have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of hands-on experience. They're familiar with like different workflows, different tools, and well, they have a lot of experience. However, there's one challenge of the senior engineer, and it is known as the curse of knowledge. So when you're someone who's just very knowledgeable, you kind of run into an issue whenever you want to explain something to a total beginner. And I experienced it on some level. So I was trying to help someone break into tech, learn how to code, and I was like, oh wow, there's just so much that I know, and I'm not sure where to even begin. Like, I was going to introduce like the basics of the programming language, but then I was like, wait, I haven't told them where to write the code in the first place. And someone asked me like a question like, how do you get the code for an open source project? I was like, oh my God, I haven't explained like NPM and like, package managers. To me, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I use them every day. But when I try to explain it to someone, I kind of like ran into an issue. Like, okay, how do I start? How do I begin? And I lacked kind of like this beginner perspective. So on the other hand, when you have a junior engineer, now junior, I would say kind of like not a super junior, but someone who has some like programming knowledge already, but they're interested in creating content, being part of the community, and developer marketing. So on the other hand, they have gaps in their knowledge and they have less hands-on experience, which is expected. But on the other hand, they have a fresh perspective and can help the developer relations team communicate to a wider audience. So, say for example, at Prisma, I Prisma is a tool for databases. It's an ORM. So I was a front end developer. So I had gaps in my knowledge. I like backend was just this abstract thing that I didn't have a lot of experience with. So yeah, like I was like, okay, this is scary. I didn't know a lot of stuff. However, I came with a fresh perspective. I was able to be like, okay, this part's confusing. This part's also confusing. And I was able just to ask questions that helped us kind of like shape the developer experience. I was like, okay, wait, this like data modeling thing, which is like a database specific thing, is complex. Why don't I like create a resource that helps developers kind of like be more productive and give them a better getting started experience? So in a way, these two different levels of experience, they complement each other. So like on one hand, you have the senior engineer who's just super knowledgeable. Whenever there's someone with like a very specific use case, they can help them. But when it comes to beginners, they will struggle a little bit. But on the other hand, when a junior developer is like, they have gaps in their knowledge, they can also bring something valuable to the team. And that's why you should strive to have both of these on your team, not just, a DevRel team of seniors, but also, people who might not be super familiar with the tool, but they're comfortable with like creating content. They're comfortable like speaking, coming to events, hanging out in the community. And yeah, this is kind of like it. And that's why you shouldn't just hire seniors. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mahmoud, for that talk. I just want to check if we have any talks. Sorry, any questions in the
Sure.
Discord. So any questions for Mahmoud? Let's have a look.
Please do feel free to drop them into the speaker questions channel and we'll ask them here live.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure we got. I mean, there's quite an interesting conversation going on around kind of the hiring side of things. But Mahmoud, what I find really interesting in what you said was the idea that actually, people look at junior developer advocates as maybe less capable, but actually they're differently capable. Um, and I wonder which point you discover as a team lead, what the right mix is. And I'm not asking you for the answer there, but it is interesting. So if you're from your point of view of being relatively early in your DevRel career, how have you found that DevRel managers have been able to make the most of what you have to offer versus compared to someone who's more senior?
Sure. So I have a manager, wonderful manager, and he's been able to kind of like point me in the right direction. So I'm someone who's like young, I have like lots of energy, I want to contribute, I want to create content, and sometimes I'm like, hey, I want to do this thing, and they're like, how like what about you focus on this other area? Like you don't have a ton of knowledge in this area, so explore it. Try to just learn this thing, document your learnings, turn it into a piece of content, and this is kind of like how like right now I have a course that I'm working on. It's like building a full stack app, like something complete. This was like my idea, and it was just this big project. And I was like, okay, I want to teach people how to combine different tools together. And he was like, sure, go for it. So yeah, I would say this was kind of like he pointed me in the right direction, and he was like, okay, you have some gaps in your knowledge, but that's okay. You can learn on the job, document your learnings, share it with the community. Because when someone is a junior, or like someone doesn't have a lot of experience, or actually maybe someone who is very experienced but they're just not familiar with the language, for example, it's still very new to them. They're like, oh, okay, this is a piece of content that I can use as a reference or as a starting point.
I really like that aspect of like pointing someone in the right direction because it's sort of like because as a junior, it's also sort of your
Yeah.
ability to sort of like discover what it is where it is that you shine on top of what the things that you're already amazing at, you know? So having someone guide you and help you find those areas where you shine is also something really invigorating.
Yeah, and it's super helpful because I don't know. Like, I would say if I was like alone on my team and building the DevRel team on my own, because you have developer advocates working solo, I would have kind of like struggled a little bit identifying, okay, which area to focus on first. And when you have someone who's senior who has worked with the product longer than I did, they can easily tell, oh, we have this area where we don't have a lot of content on. We want to cover this area as well. So yeah, I would say I would like having someone manages you helps you get faster and be able to just yeah just shine and focusing on your strength and yeah.
Love it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so
Well,
much.
look, Mahmoud, where can people find you on the internet?
So I'm most active on Twitter, so like it's you can find it. I'll drop it in on Discord. It's like this is Mahmoud underscore. But yeah, this is where I'm most active. Feel free to DM me if you have any questions. You want to talk about like developer relations, how to get into it. Yeah, I'd love to help.